Okay, stolen presents. You already know what time it is. Animated horror story. Animated horror story. Boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom, boom. Ba-dum, ba-dum, boom. So, where we at today, y'all? We at somebody else's house. Someone new house. Brand new house. Why? Because this just popped up into my thing. Into my suggestions. It was like, hey, go over to DNA Dark Knight Animations house. And I said, who? They said, girl, DNA Dark Knight Animations. And I was like, all right, we'll see what they got over there. We'll see what they got going on for my good cousins. 'Cause they gotta have something good going on. They gotta be able to spook us. So we gonna start here. 3 true family horror stories animated. We gonna immediately subscribe, obviously. Immediately like the video, turn on the captions stuff. And for what I want y'all to do is please go grab a blunt, please grab a bag of chips, please grab a bottle of water, please grab a blanket so you can be snug. You know, the 4 B's. You can have a blunt, a snack, some water, and snuggle. And we're gonna hop right into it, and we're gonna see what's going on over here. We're gonna see how they treating us. We're gonna see how they treating us and what's gonna happen. Look at him. He looks scary, don't he? He look creepy.
My family was talking about my marriage. I was still
Okay.
in college and didn't want to marry just yet. Last night, father and mother came to my room and told me that a very genuine family, who is also a possible investor for the company as well, had offered a marriage proposal for me.
Fixed marriage.
I didn't say much at the time because I liked the picture of the guy that mom showed me. I was not ready for sudden change, so I asked my father to allow me some time to think over this. I knew that they would not put too much pressure on me because they were very understanding, so I felt a bit relieved. My name is Trisha Scott. I am the daughter of one of the richest families in the area.
Okay.
My father is the owner of standalone restaurants, and my mother is a fashion designer, famous for the most fashionable footwear designs. My father married my mother, who is an Indian belonging from Punjab, because he fell in love with her. After a few days of having the marriage conversation,
So they got married out of love, then they want you to have a fixed marriage. I'm just saying, y'all got married out of love. Y'all love each other. Y'all actually love each other, and you want me to get married because to make y'all some money? Y'all already got money. Do y'all not have money, or are we broke? Are we going bankrupt? Can you just let me know what's happening? Cause
Punjab, because he fell in love with her. After a few days of having the marriage conversation with my parents, I received a text from an unknown number. Hey Trisha, I'm Daniel, and I would like to talk to you. It would be better if we meet in person. I got your number from my parents. Your parents must have also talked to you about marriage or something. Call me or text me back if you're reading this.
Marriage or something.
I read this while I was coming back from my college. I decided to revert when I was about to sleep, but I didn't know what to say, so I couldn't type anything. Next day, I thought I should directly ask him to meet me so that we could converse about this whole marriage thing.
Okay.
During my lunchtime, I asked him to meet me at a cafe near my college. Surprisingly, he was there waiting for me when I reached there after my college.
Hell no.
We sat for more than an hour, had coffee and a brownie together. He was not ready for marriage as he was doing internship at a 5-star hotel.
Okay.
The conversation with him made it clear that both of us did not want to go for marriage just yet.
No.
But we liked each other's company, so we kept in touch with each other. It wasn't long when Daniel's family contacted my father and asked for an answer for the proposal. It was evening of a Sunday when mother came to me.
Y'all both don't want to get
She
married.
said many emotional things, that they had many dreams for my marriage, and this is the right age. father also told me that this is a good thing for his business, and Daniel's family had no issue with my studies. I spoke with Daniel on this matter. He said his family is somewhat eager for this marriage for some reason that doesn't make sense to him as well. That time, we thought that it's all because of the business. So, we decided to get married and focus on our careers together. I liked him, and I thought if this is what will make our parents happier, then let it be. I was about to get my degree in the next 3 months, so my marriage was fixed for after 5 months. It all happened so fast. I got married while I had already applied for the post-graduation entrance exam. Daniel used to be very busy with his internship, and I used to study most of the time. One day, Daniel asked me for some money and said it was really important, so I lent him about $500,000, which he promised to return later. Then one day, when I was taking out a necklace to wear, I saw some of my jewels were missing. I searched a lot, but couldn't find. I asked Daniel if he knows anything about it.
He knew.
He behaved oddly, which made me feel guilty for asking him. So I looked around a bit more for it, but then I thought that I might have lost it somewhere, so I stopped looking for it.
In his pocket.
But then one evening, when I got a call from Daniel's mother, she told me that they had lost most of their money by a bad investment, and someone is threatening her, asking her to give money. But she did not explain in details about what she was getting threatened for. I was still shocked. I asked her to share the complete details with me so that I can contact the police about the same. But Daniel's mother did not share anything, and she was asking for a large sum that I couldn't give her. I then asked her again to tell the police about it, or have a conversation with Daniel once, but she said it was very scary for her. She told me she did not want to tell Daniel as it would affect his career. It seemed like a mother's natural instinct speaking those things. So I decided to take this big step without consulting anyone and lend her the money she needed from my own saving account. I was in so much pressure with my studies and everything that was going on with me since I got married. So I couldn't focus on my studies, and it was stressing me out a lot. Later that day, Daniel surprised me with some food and flowers that made me a bit happy. But who would have known that happiness is just an illusion? We both went for sleeping, and in the middle of the night, I woke up when I heard some voice, but I stayed still and did not open my eyes or made any move. It was Daniel's voice. He was talking to his mother, and they were planning on asking my parents for some money. And then he was going to dump me and marry another girl to get money from her as well. It was her, my mother-in-law, who took the jewels, and there was no blackmailer neither. Daniel needed any money for anything important back then. They were just playing with me to get the money from me and my parents. I heard it all, but did not say anything at that time, as it was safe to play along till I get enough evidence. Next day, I report to the police. They looked into my case secretly. All of it was so blunt when the police officer said that they were already gold diggers. They had been reported earlier in the nearby city 1 or 2 years prior. Reportedly, they forged their documents, and they made people believe that they were investors, and later scammed them. I gave Daniel divorce after that, and police captured them. This incident made me so strong, and I focused only on my studies, and later started my own business.
Just like
After that, I met a decent guy with whom I fell in love.
Exactly.
It was hard to trust someone again, but he never, ever asked for anything from me.
Good.
Instead, he was always ready to give me everything I wanted.
Good. What? He ain't shit.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
I'm not sure how to start. I suppose I should explain how I got here. It's not a thing I ever saw myself doing. I'm not a highly trained super soldier, drawn to combat or a tough guy in any way.
So what you do?
Until then, I'd only fired a gun a few times, taking pot shots at cans and the like. My interests focused mainly on comics and video games like most guys my age. In high school, I was in the chess club and still play a lot online. When I began college, I caught the coding bug, and that is what I focused on.
coding?
I graduated with a degree and got a job with a small game developer.
Oh,
the job's been fun, and my coworkers are really cool and smart people. A lot smarter than me, in truth. Now, up until 2020, I had lived on my own for a few years. Unfortunately, that year was a perfect storm of misfortune for my family and the world at large.
That's your mama and daddy.
In addition to the pandemic, my mother made the difficult decision to divorce my stepfather.
Oh,
she had finally grown tired of enough of his verbal and physical abuse to kick him out. She was now responsible for providing for herself and my 12-year-old brother on one income. In spite of the odds, she was making it. Then the lockdowns began and she lost her job. This was a disaster. As soon as I found out, I moved out of my place and in with them. I quickly sold what I could and put the rest of my belongings in storage. There was no way I was going to let my family get turned out onto the streets, and certainly not while a deadly plague was ravaging the planet.
How sweet.
The lockdowns were a mixed bag for us. My job was unaffected for the most part. All work switched off-site. The extra money I saved was put into food and other bills. My mother, who had always been very interested in vintage clothing, began reselling them on Etsy and eBay.
Shit, Mom.
At least on the financial front, we were eking out an existence. The good always comes with the bad, and my stepfather was nothing but bad. I had encouraged my mother to file a restraining order against him as a just-in-case measure after kicking him out, but instead, he still will be allowed to see his son. I considered other options, but it didn't seem fair cutting my little brother off from his dad. So as long as he played nice, I would mind my own business and avoid him when he came around. Fortunately, the lockdowns came to an end and we were allowed to restart our lives. I began working out of the office again and my brother returned to school. Mom quickly found a part-time job tending bar downtown. It was not an ideal situation, but a start at the least. My stepfather had to screw it up, though. He discovered where Mom was working and began frequenting her workplace. Mom had more than enough experience dealing with his crap and took his provocations on the chin. As usual, he got too drunk and pushed things too far. The night he threw a full glass of beer in my mom's face, the bouncers threw him out in his butt. I wish I could say that he learned his lesson, but bullies are often slow on the uptake. I couldn't deal with the humiliation, so he waited outside of our apartment, continuing to drink all the while. He sprang from the bushes and beat my mom mercilessly until she was able to escape into the safety of the apartment. I just happened to be away that night working on a last-minute deadline. Had I been there to witness it, what came later may have happened a lot sooner than it did. I arrived late the next afternoon, so exhausted that I could barely see, but the second I saw my mom's face, I exploded. I'd had enough. If the cops didn't do their jobs, I would do it for them. I think Mom could see how serious I was, and it scared her. I believe she came up with her plan not to stop the abuse, but to prevent me from ruining my life because of it. I was in the process of calling the cops when she asked me to hear her out. I was reluctant, but did so.
What'd she say?
No matter what she said, I still had every intent of making that call.
That's good.
She reminded me that the police had been involved many times before, but whether because of her reluctance to testify or just plain systemic disinterest, he had gotten off with little more than a slap on the wrist. Rather than call authorities, she proposed that we move somewhere that he was less likely to bother us. The lockdowns had put an end to any real reason for us to stay. Her original employer, along with many other employers in the area, had been destroyed. The school district, which had never been very good, was now in a shamble, and there was nothing keeping us there. I thought about it, and now that I'd calmed down somewhat, agreed that it sounded good. I may have had the most to lose, but I figured that I could probably work remotely. If not, I was sure that I'd be able to find a job using my skills wherever we ended up. And so the preparations began. That evening, we packed everything up that we could into our cars, and while we did so, I noticed Mom putting her dad's old Smith & Wesson revolver in her purse. I gave her a questioning look, but she quickly closed the purse and continued with the packing, and I kept my feelings to myself.
So you had a gun.
The following morning, we rose up early and hit the road. We hadn't informed anyone that we were leaving, not even the apartment manager. Anyone who needed to know could be informed after we arrived at our new home, and even they wouldn't be informed of where. We convoyed for most of the day, only stopping for a quick lunch. About 6 p.m., we decided to grab a room for the night. I made an order for some pizzas. We'd been done eating about a half an hour when Mom got a text from my stepfather. I watched Mom turn dead pale as she read it. She just stared at the screen with her mouth gaping open. I grabbed the phone from her and read the message out loud. Did you actually think I'd let you run away with my son that easy? My brother and I stared at one another in astonishment. We both jumped up and ran to the window. I yanked the curtain back hard and scanned the parking lot for him. It was the worst thing that I could have done. He saw me first and began running toward the room. I yanked the curtains closed, but it was already too late.
Of course it was.
We couldn't do anything but stare at each other in dread as we waited for him to arrive. The silence in the room was terrifying. Outside, the sound of running grew closer by the second. A nauseating churning stirred in my guts, and I would liken it to waiting for a bomb to land and blow you to bits. I fought off the overpowering desire to vomit. Gradually, the clomping of his boots became a deafened pounding until nothing. For a brief moment, we started to believe that we had been somehow saved.
No.
Mom crept toward the door and carefully peeked through the peephole and just as quickly jumped back from it.
Oh.
Suddenly, the door exploded open and off its hinges. My brother and I turned and ran, but it was too late for my mom.
Where are y'all
She had
at?
become trapped under the door, putting her well in reach of my stepfather. He effortlessly snatched her up by her shirt and began punching her in the face as hard as possible. Each hit slung Mom's body back like a rag doll. My brother stood nearby helplessly begging his father to stop. I too could only watch as he pounded the life from her.
What are you talking about?
There was little I could do. He was so much larger than me, massive and strongly built by years of hard manual labor, and I was left with only one option.
You?
The one that I had often threatened in anger but never imagined I'd ever have to choose.
Boy,
Yet I had little choice.
hurry up and choose it.
He clearly intended to kill her.
He did.
If I was going to do something, it must be done immediately.
Tell your brother to move and
Once I decided,
grab what you
the
need
act was
to.
almost mechanical. I marched over to Mom's purse and pulled the pistol from it.
Yep.
I felt like that I was in a dream. It would be as simple as shooting a few cans. I pulled the trigger in 3 quick motions.
Bow, bow, bow.
The gun's sound deafened me and a ringing drowned out my ears.
Sure do.
My stepfather stumbled back a moment and then glared at me with the most amazed and shocked face.
Yep, yo stupid bitch
It's the
ass
craziest
got shot.
thing. I'm still completely bewildered when I look back at it. I think he honestly believed that he was going to be able to murder my mom and take my brother with him and get away with it.
Like...
It's insane, but I truly believe he thought that. I was about to pull the trigger a few more times, but he stumbled around and collapsed just outside the threshold of the door.
Okay.
I carefully stepped around my brother, who was in a heap on the floor, sobbing. I nudged my stepdad's body with my foot and didn't get a reaction. I looked over to my mom, who was unconscious on the floor. Her face was so bad, and I was sure that she was dead. I stuck the pistol in my front pocket and ran back around to where my phone was charging. I unplugged it and called 911. Just to be safe, I placed the pistol back in Mom's purse to make sure the cops didn't shoot me by accident.
Like, you know.
And while I waited, I checked Mom for a pulse and was happy to find that she was still alive.
Okay.
Help soon arrived and rushed her off to a hospital.
Yep.
Considering the circumstances, I had to stay behind with the police. I told them what had happened and the history we had with the subject, and they repeated the same questions over and over, I guess to see if I changed my story.
Yep, to make sure.
And they must have been satisfied because they let me leave for the hospital a few hours later. I was instructed not to leave the city until I was formally cleared, which was fine with me. A reason for running had been dealt with after all. They did take the gun as evidence, of course, and this bothered me a little because it had been my grandfather's service weapon when he was a sheriff, and I assumed that we'd never get it back. In the end, if this was to be the price for security and peace, it was well worth paying. When I arrived at the hospital, Mom was in surgery. The doctor's preliminary diagnosis was grim. Her face and skull had been fractured along with her brain almost certainly being enlarged due to swelling. There was also some concern that she may lose sight in one of her eyes. Despite the bad news, I was relieved that she had survived the attack, and the rest was in God's hands now. I joined my brother in the waiting room. He had to have been in shock. The last few hours had been an emotional roller coaster. Most adults live an entire life not having experienced as much as he had in such a short time. I sat and watched him for a couple of minutes. He stared at the TV keenly as if his life depended on it, and I broke the silence with an apology. I wasn't sorry for what I'd done, but I still felt bad for having to do it in his presence. He turned to me and thought deeply for a long moment before speaking. "It's okay. He was an a-hole and he got what he had coming to him.
Okay.
I loved him, but he was a monster.
Okay.
Don't feel bad.
Okay.
Mom's alive because of you."
Okay.
I was shocked by his reply, to be honest.
Okay. As long as
He was a very quiet kid, and I never heard him voice those type of feelings before.
Oh.
And I was at a loss for words, so I gave him a big hug and let it go at that.
Oh.
Mom came out of surgery a few hours later, and we were soon allowed to see her. I had tried to prepare myself mentally for what I may see, but I was shocked nonetheless. Her head was almost twice its size and wrapped completely, but for a few narrow tubes exiting it. I maintained my composure, but my brother was a different story. He was a blubbering mess, and I don't blame him.
Yeah.
It was not a sight anyone his age should have to see, especially when it was his own mother. The next week was a long period of watching and waiting. The hospital was cool enough to let us crash in the room. I had also gotten us a new motel room so we could clean up or sleep in a real bed occasionally. Gradually, Mom's condition would improve, and she even managed to keep vision in her damaged eye.
Okay. Good shit.
Nearly a month later, she was finally released. It was a day I had feared may never come, and I was very emotional when it arrived.
Ooh.
Meanwhile, as Mom recuperated, the investigation continued. A few days before her release,
What investigation?
I had found us all a small house to rent in town.
Oh.
It was beginning to look, at least for the time being, that this was to be our new home. It was a happy relief when the call finally came. After an exhaustive investigation, authorities had deemed my shooting to be justifiable, and I was a free man in the eyes of the law.
Okay.
The call came just 15 days ago, and I'm still somewhat shaken. I'm afraid something's going to happen to ruin our new life. Mom is improving by leaps and bounds every day. I've been able to keep my job working remotely, and my brother's continually proving to be an amazingly resilient individual. There is a small cloud looming off in the distance. Our lawyer has indicated that my stepfather's family has made threats of filing a civil lawsuit against me. He seems to think it's all talk, and I can't imagine them coming up with the resources needed to mount such a long and pointless undertaking. They are all a bunch of aimless poor alcoholics and addicts that can't even be bothered to hold down a job, and I remain optimistic considering my adversaries. I can't think of any more to include. The situation appears to be stable, and I think the biggest of our troubles has passed. Our new home is a warm and inviting place full of kind people. I wish every place was this nice. Mom has every intention of going back to work soon, and my brother has already started at his new school. It seems that after all the years my family has suffered, we may finally have come out the other side of the tunnel. The future should be bright from here on. My only regret is that a boy had to lose his father forever to get there, and that I had to be the one who caused it.
It's alright. Both y'all still got a mama.
To say that James Rupert's upbringing was rough would be quite the understatement.
But what on with James?
Born on April 12th of 1934, his mother Charity had told him from a very early age that she would have preferred having a daughter as her second child, giving him the distinct impression that he was unwanted.
He is.
Leonard, his father, treated him no better.
Ugh.
The family was frequently terrorized by a man whose lack of patience gave way to a violent temper, and he showed his two children very little affection. Yet neither would be given the chance to reconcile, as Leonard died in 1947 when James was just 12 years old. After his father's death, James's older brother, Leonard Jr., became the family patriarch, and to his younger brother's horror, Jr. mimicked his late father's cruel and mocking behavior, often taunting James for being, as he put it, a weakling. By the time he was a young adult, James's awful home life meant that he already had one failed attempt at taking his own life under his belt. He stood at a meager 5'5", weighed just 135 pounds, and was described as a modest, bookish, and helpful young man who was unremarkable and quiet. As a result, for his shy demeanor, James never once got into any trouble with the law and lived most of his life as a law-abiding citizen. But by 1975, the fraternal love James felt towards his brother was wearing thin, and the envy he felt over Leonard Jr.'s successful career and loving family was beginning to boil over. James had dropped out of college after only 2 years, and by the time 1975 came around, he was unemployed, unmarried, and was still living at home with his mother. On the other hand, Leonard Jr. had earned himself a degree in electrical engineering, owned his own home in Fairfield, Ohio, and had 8 children.
8?
But what's more, the woman that Jr. had married was none other than James's own ex-girlfriend, Alma. At first, James simply took this in stride, but then again, Jr. was fond of reminding him of it, how she had been right not to marry a weakling such as he. On top of that, James's relationship with his mother didn't seem to have improved over the years. Charity was sick and tired of James's apparent inability to hold a steady job, and blasted him for having to self-medicate with alcohol, telling him he was unable to pay the rent, then she'd kick him out onto the street just like any other tenant. Obviously, living through such an unbearable situation took a terrible toll on James's mental health, and by the mid-70s, he found himself battling a deep and unshakable depression as he got closer and closer to the breaking point. He seemed deeply vexed and even mentioned how troubled he was to a 28-year-old waitress named Wanda Bishop. The mother of 5 would later state how, during one of her shifts at the 19th Hole Cocktail Lounge, James had told her of his growing frustrations with his mother's demands on him, of his impending eviction, and how he desperately needed to solve both problems. James stayed at the bar until it closed at 2:30 a.m. on Easter Sunday. But by that time, he didn't need to do any more thinking. He had decided on a permanent solution to his woes. Around noon on Easter Sunday of 1975, Leonard Jr. packed his wife and 8 children into his car and drove over to their grandparents' house. When they arrived, James was still upstairs in his bedroom, sleeping off a hangover after his long night of drinking, and was only roused by the sounds of children hunting Easter eggs on the front lawn. He groggily put on some pants and a bathrobe, then went downstairs to greet his family for what would turn out to be the final time. It was just before 4 p.m. when James walked into the family kitchen. His mother was preparing dinner with the aid of both Leonard Jr. and his wife Alma, while the children played in the TV room. Leonard detected his brother's presence before he'd even turned to look at him and made some derisive comment about having slept all afternoon. But when Leonard finally did set eyes on his brother, what he saw made him freeze up in horror. Leonard stood there, eyes bloodshot, hair a mess, pointing a loaded .357 Magnum at his terrified brother. It was the last thing he would ever see. With the barrel aimed squarely at his brother's face, James pulled the revolver's trigger, sending a chunk of lead smashing into Leonard's skull at supersonic speed. His head just about exploded, sending a spray of carbon soup all over his nearby wife. She tried to scream, but James shot her in the head before the sound could ever escape her throat. Her mother simply watched, immobilized with fear as James then turned the gun on her, too. Alarmed at the loud noises coming from the kitchen, 3 of James's nephews and nieces came running to the kitchen to see what was going on. The hellish scene that greeted 11-year-old David, 9-year-old Teresa, and 13-year-old Carol was enough to send them into a frenzy of terrified screams, screams which James didn't hesitate in silencing with shots from his .357. James then walked into the TV room where the execution style of killing devolved into something considerably more frenzied and fear-soaked. One child was shot in the chest, but the remaining children were shot as many as 3 times each, evidence that they had attempted to flee as James emptied his chambers, reloaded, then continued firing on his own young family members. Within 5 minutes of James waking up and walking downstairs, His entire immediate family was dead by his own hand.
Oh.
He then called the police to tell them what he'd done, sat down on the couch, and simply waited for the authorities to arrive. The shocking brutality of the killings rocked the small town in which they occurred. Many who were familiar with James Rupert thought him to be incapable of such violent acts and didn't even know that he owned a gun. People were stunned to hear of the hateful tensions that simmered underneath the surface, as by all accounts, the Rupert family were considered a perfectly pleasant and well-adjusted bunch. The very same day he was arrested, James was charged with 11 counts of aggravated homicide. Yet in sharp contrast to his initial cooperation, he refused to participate in any kind of interview. One of the few things James actually said to the arresting officers was that he intended to plead insanity and would escape any kind of punishment, since no jury in the land would find him guilty of murder once they'd heard his story. But the only story that grabbed anyone's attention was the horrific level of violence at the crime scene.
Exactly, boy.
County Prosecutor John Holcomb stated that there was so much blood on the first floor of Rupert's home that it was dripping through the floorboards and into the basement. Just over a year later, the house was open to the public and all of its contents were auctioned off. It was then cleaned, recarpeted, and rented to a family new to the area whose members were unaware of the murders that had taken place there.
Yeah, so disrespectful.
Other families had moved in and out, and the house was frequently occupied, but some complained that there were still bloodstains in the wooden floorboard of the TV room. One family even vacated the house entirely, claiming that they were hearing voices and other explained noises.
What'd I say?
At his trial, a jury found James Rupert guilty on all 11 counts of murder and sentenced him to 11 consecutive life sentences.
Oh, forever.
Just as he'd promised, James appealed on the grounds that he was insane, and in 1982, defense attorney Hugh D. Holbrook personally funded the hiring of expert psychiatrists and psychologists from all over the country in a bid to prove his client was unfit to stand trial. But thankfully, a judge saw through the act. James was ruled sane, and the life sentence is upheld. Rupert remains incarcerated in the Franklin Medical Center in Columbus, Ohio, and has since been denied parole by the prison board. James's next hearing is set for February of 2025, when he will be 90 years old. By that point, James Rupert will have spent more of his life inside a cell than outside of one, and it's doubtful that a 90-year-old man will be able to properly enjoy his final years of freedom. But then again, maybe that's a small measure of justice, since the man stole the life, love, and liberty of 8 of his young relatives. James only narrowly avoided the death penalty for his crimes, so maybe it's only right that he die in prison, where child killers like him most definitely belong.
And they do. Oh. Something had popped up just a few seconds ago.
James like him most definitely.
What is this one? I'll see. So how'd y'all like it? I say I enjoyed it. I feel like the stories were like it's horror because it's just terrible shit happening and like real life examples. You know what I mean? So I definitely enjoy it. All the way. All of the stories were ain't shit. Like had ain't shit people in them, you know, amazing stories, ain't shit people. So yeah, they're all pretty good. They're hitting. Let me know how you feel about this channel in the comments. Would you like to see more of them? I might give y'all another video just so you know y'all could be secure. Like, what's that video in the back right there? Like I said, what is it? So we'll figure it out. And until next time, you guys, I love you. Bye-bye.